One choice. One moment. One love story. Welcome to When He Chose Her. Enjoy the story. The biggest opportunities in life rarely knock on the right door. Sometimes, they arrive carrying a cardboard tray of coffee and an apology. Rain tapped softly against the skyscrapers of Midtown Manhattan as Evelyn Hartwell hurried down Lexington Avenue. Her blonde ponytail already damp despite the oversized umbrella she was fighting to keep under control. The morning rush was in full force. Yellow taxis splashed through puddles. Business executives marched toward glass towers with phones pressed against their ears. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed between the buildings before fading into the city noise. Evelyn glanced at her watch and winced. She was 7 minutes behind schedule. 7. In New York, 7 minutes could feel like an eternity, especially when delivering coffee to people who measured their days in billion-dollar decisions. Come on, Evelyn, she muttered under her breath as she adjusted the cardboard carrier holding 12 carefully labeled drinks. Her manager had specifically warned her not to be late. The client occupied an entire executive floor and apparently complained about everything from cold coffee to elevator wait times. Not exactly the kind of people she wanted to upset before 9 in the morning. She stepped inside the towering Whitmore Plaza building and immediately felt underdressed. Marble floors stretched beneath crystal lighting. Men in tailored suits crossed the lobby with the confidence of people who owned pieces of the world. Evelyn tightened her grip on the coffee tray. Her black waitress uniform suddenly felt embarrassingly ordinary. After checking the delivery slip, she hurried toward the elevator bank. Floor 47. Easy enough. The elevator climbed smoothly while soft instrumental music played overhead. Evelyn balanced the drinks carefully and mentally rehearsed her apology for being late. Maybe if she smiled enough, nobody would complain. The elevator doors opened. She stepped out quickly, turned left, walked through a pair of glass doors, and immediately realized something was very wrong. The room fell silent. 20. People stared at her. A wall-sized screen displayed charts, financial projections, and graphs she couldn't begin to understand at a glance. Men and women in expensive suits sat around a polished conference table longer than her entire apartment. At the head of the room stood a tall man with dark hair, steel blue eyes, and the unmistakable presence of someone accustomed to being listened to. Grayson Whitmore, founder, Billionaire, one of the most influential business leaders in America. Evelyn froze. So did everyone else. The only sound was the quiet hum of the projector. She looked at the coffee tray, then at the room, then back at the coffee tray. Well, she said carefully, I think I may have accidentally interrupted capitalism. Nobody laughed. A woman near the screen blinked twice. One executive rubbed his forehead. Another looked personally offended by her existence. Evelyn felt heat rush into her cheeks. Sorry, she added quickly. Wrong room. She started backing toward the door. Then something unexpected happened. A laugh escaped from the head of the table. Deep, genuine, surprised. Every head turned toward Grayson Whitmore. Apparently nobody was accustomed to hearing him laugh either. He shook his head slightly while fighting a smile. Interrupted capitalism? He repeated. Evelyn shrugged awkwardly. I was trying to be optimistic. A few people around the table exchanged confused looks. Grayson's amusement only grew. For a moment, the tension in the room seemed to crack. Just enough. Evelyn took that as her opportunity to escape. Anyway, congratulations on whatever billionaire things are happening in here. She pointed vaguely toward the screen. I'll see myself out. But before she could leave, her eyes drifted across the giant financial chart behind the presenters. Something caught her attention. A small detail. A number that looked strangely familiar. She frowned, then looked again. Her expression changed. Grayson noticed immediately. The amusement disappeared from his face. Something wrong, he asked. Evelyn hesitated. Every survival instinct told her to leave. Deliver the coffee. Forget this ever happened. Yet the numbers on the screen bothered her. A lot. She shifted the tray slightly. Probably nothing. One executive sighed impatiently. Then thank you for stopping by. Evelyn nodded. She should leave. She knew she should leave. But the words slipped out anyway. It's just. She glanced at the chart one more time. If those projections are based on last quarter's manufacturing costs, that acquisition probably loses money. Silence. Absolute silence. The room stopped breathing. Several executives stared at her as though she had suddenly started speaking another language. One man actually laughed. Another shook his head dismissively. Grayson Whitmore didn't move, didn't blink. He simply stared at the waitress holding 12 cups of coffee as if she had just stepped out of nowhere and rewritten the morning. Outside the windows, rain continued to fall over Manhattan. Inside, nobody had any idea that one wrong door was about to change everything. For 3 long seconds, nobody said a word. The conference room seemed to shrink around Evelyn Hartwell as 20 executives stared at her like she had just wandered onto the stage of a Broadway show halfway through the final act. The tray of coffee suddenly felt twice as heavy. One man near the far end of the table let out a short laugh. Based on what exactly, he asked. The whipped cream on the cappuccinos? A few people smiled. Evelyn wished they had not. Being ignored would have been easier. She shifted her weight awkwardly. Honestly, it was just an observation. An observation? Another executive repeated. You glanced at a screen for 2 seconds. Evelyn nodded. That is true. The woman leading the presentation crossed her arms. Then perhaps you should let professionals handle the analysis. Evelyn immediately nodded again. That sounds reasonable. She took 1 step backward toward the door. Grayson Whitmore raised a hand. Instantly, the room went silent again. His eyes never left Evelyn. Pull up the manufacturing cost assumptions. The woman hesitated. Grayson, we already verified those numbers. Humor me. Nobody argued with him twice. Within seconds, new spreadsheets appeared across the giant screen. Columns of figures filled the room. Revenue forecasts, supply chain estimates, production costs. Grayson studied the data while several executives exchanged irritated glances. Evelyn quietly prayed for an elevator to magically appear behind her. Then Grayson's expression changed. Just slightly. His jaw tightened. The woman at the screen frowned. Wait. Another executive leaned forward. That cannot be right. Someone reached for a calculator. Another opened a laptop. The room that had dismissed Evelyn 30 seconds earlier suddenly erupted into nervous analysis. Numbers flew back and forth across the table. One assumption had been pulled from an outdated quarter during a market fluctuation. The mistake looked small. It was not. Correcting it reduced projected profits dramatically. Several faces turned pale. Grayson remained perfectly calm. That was somehow more intimidating than anger. Evelyn watched the chaos unfold with growing discomfort. Okay, she said softly. I am definitely in trouble now. To her surprise, Grayson almost smiled again. How did you catch it? Evelyn blinked. What? The error. She looked toward the screen. The material costs looked strange. Strange. A little. Grayson folded his arms. Define a little. Evelyn glanced around the room. Every eye was back on her. Wonderful. Exactly how she had hoped to spend her Tuesday morning. I used to compare supplier reports for a family business, she explained. The ratio seemed off. You saw that from 20 feet away? Asked one executive. Evelyn shrugged. The screen is very large. For the first time, a few people laughed. Even some of the executives who had been openly annoyed seemed unsure what to make of her. Grayson studied her carefully. There was something unsettling about the way he observed people. Not rude. Not cold. Just intensely focused. Like a man constantly solving puzzles. And somehow she had become the puzzle. He walked toward the screen and looked at the revised projections. The room waited. Finally, he turned back toward the table. Had we signed this acquisition today, we would have spent months correcting a problem that should have been caught during preliminary review. Nobody responded. The silence. Was answer enough? Grayson looked directly at Evelyn. You may have saved us a very expensive headache. Evelyn immediately lifted the coffee tray. Great. Happy to help. Now if someone could tell me where Suite 47B actually is, I can deliver these before they become iced coffee. A few executives chuckled despite themselves. Grayson glanced toward his assistant. 47B is across the hall. Evelyn closed her eyes. Of course it is. More laughter this time. Genuine laughter. The tension continued to crack. She started toward the exit again. Then Grayson spoke. Miss Hartwell. She stopped. Yes. Leave the coffee. Evelyn frowned. For the meeting? No. He pulled out an empty chair beside the conference table. For you. The room froze again. Several executives looked genuinely alarmed. Grayson pointed at the chair. Sit down. Evelyn stared at him. Then at the chair. Then back at him. Something told her the next 5 minutes were about to become much more complicated than delivering coffee. The chair might as well have been sitting on another planet. Evelyn stared at it, while 20 executives stared at her. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Somewhere outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, rain streaked down the glass and blurred the Manhattan skyline into shades of silver and gray. "I cannot sit there," Evelyn finally said. Grayson raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "Because I am carrying coffee." "Set it down." "I am also late for work." "I will call your manager." That somehow makes it worse. A few people laughed. Even Evelyn looked surprised by her own answer. Grayson pulled out the chair another inch. 5 minutes. People always say 5 minutes. I mean it. That is exactly what people say before stealing an hour of your life. More laughter rolled around the room. The atmosphere had changed completely. 30 minutes earlier, the executives had been preparing for one of the largest acquisitions of the year. Now they were watching their billionaire founder negotiate with a waitress. Somehow, Evelyn was winning. Grayson folded his arms. 5 actual minutes. Evelyn sighed dramatically. "If my manager fires me, I am sending him your office address." "Fair." Slowly, she placed the coffee tray on a side table and sat down. The moment she did, several executives exchanged stunned looks. It was probably the first time in company history that a waitress had joined a boardroom strategy meeting. Grayson remained standing. "Simple question." Evelyn immediately shook her head. "That introduction is dangerous." "Why?" "Nobody with your net worth asks simple questions." A few executives coughed to hide their smiles. Grayson almost laughed again. "All right. What industries are positioned for growth over the next 5 years?" Evelyn blinked. "That is your simple question?" "Yes." "I am suddenly very concerned about your difficult ones." The room chuckled. Then her expression shifted. The humor remained, but something sharper appeared behind her eyes. She glanced toward the screen. "Infrastructure technology." One executive leaned forward. "Why?" "Because cities are aging faster than they are adapting." Her answer came immediately. No hesitation. "Energy systems, transportation networks, water management." Most people only notice those things when they fail. Investors notice them before they fail. Silence settled over the room again. Not uncomfortable silence. Curious silence. Grayson nodded slightly. "Interesting." Another executive jumped in. "Artificial intelligence." Evelyn shrugged. "Important. Overhyped in some sectors. Undervalued in others." "Explain." "Everyone wants artificial intelligence to replace people. The companies that win will use it to help people make better decisions instead." Several executives exchanged looks. One quietly typed notes into a laptop. Grayson noticed. So did Evelyn. "Wait," she said. "Are you taking notes?" The executive looked embarrassed. "Maybe. That feels illegal." Laughter erupted again. Even the woman who had dismissed her earlier could not hide a smile. The meeting continued. Question after question. Supply chains. Consumer behavior. Market volatility. Leadership. Hiring practices. Evelyn answered each one with the same calm confidence. Not like someone reciting information. Like someone who genuinely understood it. Every answer was practical. Every answer made sense. And every answer seemed to create more questions. Grayson found himself studying her more closely. Most people became nervous under pressure, especially in rooms like this. Evelyn seemed almost more comfortable, as if she had spent years preparing for conversations nobody expected her to have. Finally, one executive leaned back in his chair. "Where did you learn all this?" The question hung in the air. For the first time, Evelyn hesitated. Her fingers lightly touched the edge of the conference table. Just for a second. Then she smiled. "Public libraries are free." A few people laughed, but Grayson noticed something the others missed. The smile arrived a fraction too late. There was a story behind that answer. A story she did not want to tell. Before anyone could ask another question, Evelyn glanced at her watch and nearly jumped from her chair. "Oh no." "What?" Grayson asked. "I have been here 23 minutes. And I was supposed to deliver 12 coffees." She pointed toward the abandoned tray. "Those poor people probably think I stole breakfast." The room burst into laughter. Even Grayson smiled openly this time. Yet as Evelyn stood and grabbed the tray, something unexpected happened. For the first time in years, Grayson Whitmore was not thinking about a billion-dollar acquisition. He was thinking about a waitress who had walked into the wrong room and somehow become the most interesting person he had met all year. By the time Evelyn finally delivered the coffee order across the hall, nearly 40 minutes had passed since she entered the building. The clients were surprisingly understanding. One even joked that at least the coffee had received executive approval before arriving. Evelyn laughed politely, but her mind remained stuck inside the conference room. As she rode the elevator back down to the lobby, she replayed the morning again and again. The questions, the charts, the expressions on the executives' faces. Most of all, Grayson Whitmore's reaction. It was strange. People usually looked through her. Customers saw a waitress. Delivery staff saw another worker trying to make rent. Yet somehow that billionaire had looked at her as though she were a puzzle he could not solve. The thought bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Meanwhile, 47 floors above Manhattan, the acquisition meeting had resumed. At least technically. In reality, nobody seemed fully focused anymore. Several executives kept returning to discussions that had nothing to do with the deal. Where did she learn all of that? One asked. Another shook his head. Nobody casually develops that level of business understanding. Grayson listened without speaking. His attention rested on the city beyond the windows. The rain had stopped. Sunlight now pushed through the clouds and reflected across hundreds of glass towers. Finally, his chief operating officer spoke. You are thinking about her too. Grayson looked over. That obvious? Very. A few executives laughed quietly. Grayson did not deny it. He rarely wasted energy pretending. Run a background check. The room fell silent. On a waitress? Someone asked. On a person who spotted a 7-figure forecasting error from across a room. Grayson corrected calmly. There is a difference. Nobody argued. By late afternoon, a preliminary report arrived on Grayson's desk. He opened it expecting answers. Instead, he found questions. Evelyn Hartwell. Age 27. Current employment. Waitress at Parkside Cafe. Residential address. A modest apartment in Queens. No criminal record. No graduate degrees. No executive positions. No obvious explanation. Grayson frowned. He read the file twice. Then a third time. Something did not fit. The woman who had confidently debated market trends with senior executives should have left a trail. Awards. Academic records. Professional experience. Something. Yet the report looked almost ordinary. Too ordinary. Across the East River, Evelyn's day continued exactly as it always had. She refilled coffee cups, cleared tables, carried trays, smiled through customer complaints. The lunch crowd arrived. Then the afternoon rush. By 6 o'clock, her feet ached and her shoulders felt heavy. Life had returned to normal, at least on the surface. You are distracted, her co-worker Megan observed while stacking menus. Evelyn glanced up. Am I? You forgot. Table 12's extra ketchup. Evelyn gasped dramatically. My reputation is ruined. Megan laughed. Seriously, what happened? Evelyn hesitated. Then she described the morning. The wrong office. The meeting. The billionaire. The questions. By the time she finished, Megan was staring at her. None of that sounds real. That is exactly how I felt. You sat in a billion-dollar boardroom. Against my better judgment. And debated business strategy? Against my better judgment. Megan folded her arms. You know what concerns me? What? Your repeated use of the phrase against my better judgment. Evelyn smiled despite herself. For the first time all day, she relaxed. The strange morning was becoming a funny story. A weird accident. Nothing more. At least that was what she believed. Because while she wiped down tables and prepared for closing time, she had no idea that one of the most powerful men in New York was still sitting in his office long after sunset, staring at a background report that explained almost nothing. And the less Grayson Whitmore understood about Evelyn Hartwell, the more determined he became to find out who she really was. 3 days passed. Then 4. Then 5. Life settled back into its familiar rhythm for Evelyn Hartwell. Morning deliveries. Lunch rushes. Endless coffee refills. Customers who could not remember her name despite seeing her every week. The strange boardroom encounter slowly began to feel like something that had happened to somebody else. Then on Monday morning, the front door of Parkside Cafe opened, and every employee immediately noticed the man who walked in. Not because he was famous, not because he was wealthy, because people like him simply did not visit places like this. Grayson Whitmore stepped inside wearing a charcoal overcoat and carrying the calm confidence of someone accustomed to owning every room he entered. Conversations softened. Heads turned. Even the espresso machine seemed quieter. Megan nearly dropped a stack of menus. Is that him? She whispered. Evelyn looked up from behind the counter. The moment she saw him, she nearly spilled an entire pitcher of cream. Oh no. Megan grinned. That is definitely him. Grayson approached the register. Good morning. Evelyn folded her arms. You know there are approximately 12,000 coffee shops in Manhattan. Probably more. Yet somehow you found this one. Remarkable coincidence. You own satellites. Fair point. Megan quickly disappeared into the kitchen, abandoning Evelyn without mercy. Grayson ordered a simple black coffee. Nothing expensive. Nothing complicated. Then he sat by the window and opened a folder. For nearly an hour, he worked quietly while Evelyn served customers. Eventually, he left. No business questions. No strange requests. Just coffee. The next morning, he returned. Same table. Same coffee. Same calm expression. By Thursday, the entire staff had developed theories. He is recruiting you, one server insisted. He is investigating you, another claimed. Maybe he secretly loves coffee, Evelyn suggested. Nobody believed her. Not even Evelyn. The following week, Grayson returned again. Then again. Then again. One rainy afternoon, the cafe was unusually quiet. Most customers had stayed home. Grayson sat near the window reviewing documents while Evelyn wiped nearby tables. Finally, she stopped pretending not to notice him. Okay. Grayson looked up. Okay, what? You have been here 9 times. You counted. Everyone counted. A small smile appeared. That is concerning. Evelyn pointed toward his cup. You order the same thing every time. Consistency is underrated. You stay exactly 45 minutes. Efficient scheduling. And somehow you always sit in my section. Grayson leaned back. That one may be intentional. Evelyn stared at him, then laughed despite herself. It was the first genuinely personal conversation they had shared since the boardroom. Something shifted. Small. Almost invisible. Yet real. The following days became easier. Grayson still visited regularly. Sometimes they exchanged a few words. Sometimes only a glance and a quick joke. One afternoon, he asked why she never used the free time between customers to scroll through her phone like everyone else. Evelyn pointed toward the book beside the register. Because books do not send notifications. Another day, he noticed she had solved a difficult crossword puzzle in under 10 minutes. You do those for fun? He asked. No, she replied. I do them because therapy is expensive. He laughed so unexpectedly that several customers turned around. Slowly, the cafe staff stopped treating his visits like breaking news. Yet they continued teasing Evelyn relentlessly. Your billionaire is here, Megan would announce whenever the door opened. He is not my billionaire, Evelyn insisted every time. Not yet, Megan replied. Meanwhile, Grayson found himself looking forward to the visits more than he cared to admit. The conversations were brief, sometimes ridiculous, often funny. Yet unlike most people in his world, Evelyn never seemed impressed by his wealth. She challenged him, questioned him, occasionally mocked him, and somehow, that made him feel more relaxed than any executive retreat or luxury vacation ever had. Neither of them realized it yet. But somewhere between the coffee orders, the jokes, and the ordinary afternoons, a friendship had quietly begun to grow. Autumn settled over New York in shades of gold and amber. Weeks passed, and the routine that had started as a strange coincidence became something neither Evelyn nor Grayson questioned anymore. Every few days he appeared at Parkside Cafe. Every few days she pretended to be surprised. One chilly Thursday afternoon, business was slow. A steady drizzle painted the windows while soft jazz drifted through the speakers overhead. Grayson sat at his usual table reviewing documents. Evelyn was organizing supplies behind the counter when her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. The smile that usually appeared around him vanished instantly. Without a word, she stepped into the storage room. 10 minutes passed, then 15. When she finally emerged, her eyes looked tired. Not tearful, just tired. Grayson noticed immediately. Most people would not have. Everything okay? He asked when she brought over a refill. Evelyn forced a smile. Sure. That answer means no. You spend too much time negotiating. Occupational hazard. She laughed softly but looked away. For the first time since they met, silence settled. Between them. Not comfortable silence. Protective silence. The kind people build when they do not want questions. Grayson respected it. He did not push. But later that evening, after leaving the cafe, he found himself thinking about her expression. Something about it stayed with him. The next morning, his assistant entered his office carrying several folders. You asked me to continue researching Evelyn Hartwell. Grayson looked up. Did you find something? Not what I expected. She handed him a file. Grayson opened it. The first page contained an academic transcript. His eyes narrowed, then widened, then narrowed again. Top 1% of her class. National Economics Scholarship recipient. Multiple academic awards. Recommendations from professors at one of the most respected universities in the country. He turned another page, then another. Every document painted a completely different picture from the life Evelyn was living now. She had not simply been smart. She had been exceptional. What happened? He asked quietly. His assistant pointed toward the final pages. Grayson read them slowly. 7 years earlier, during her sophomore year, Evelyn's younger brother had been diagnosed with a serious medical condition requiring long-term treatment and care. Insurance covered some expenses. Not enough. Their father had passed away years before. Their mother worked multiple jobs. Someone had to step in. Someone had to sacrifice something. Evelyn withdrew from school. She turned down internships, gave up scholarships, took multiple service jobs, and never returned. Grayson sat back in his chair. The office suddenly felt very quiet. Outside his windows, Manhattan moved with its usual urgency. Millions of people chasing promotions, contracts, and opportunities. Yet one young woman had quietly walked away from her own future so her family would not face the burden alone. No interviews, no complaints, no dramatic speeches. She had simply done what needed to be done. Grayson stared at the file for a long moment. Then he closed it carefully. That evening, he visited the cafe again. Evelyn was wiping tables near closing time. You are late, she said when she saw him. No. Your coffee reputation is slipping. Tragic. She smiled faintly. Better than yesterday, but not entirely. Grayson sat down. For several minutes they talked about ordinary things. Customers. Weather. A tourist who had accidentally tried to pay with Canadian quarters. Eventually the conversation slowed. Grayson looked at her. You know, most people spend their lives talking about what they would sacrifice for family. Evelyn shrugged. Most people like talking. He held her gaze. You actually did it. For the first time, she froze. Completely still. The smile disappeared. The room seemed quieter than before. She understood immediately. Somehow he knew. Her eyes drifted toward the rain-streaked windows. My brother is doing better now, she said softly. That is all that matters. Grayson wanted to say something profound. Something worthy of the moment. But no words seemed large enough. So he simply nodded. And for the first time since he met Evelyn Hartwell, he stopped seeing the mystery. He started seeing the courage. The first signs of trouble appeared on a Tuesday morning. At Whitmore Dynamics, executives moved through the headquarters with unusual urgency. Meetings were being rescheduled. Calls were happening behind closed doors. Even employees who normally knew everything seemed uncertain. By noon, rumors had spread across 3 floors. A major acquisition was suddenly at risk. Grayson stood inside the executive conference room staring at a screen filled with conflicting reports. Numbers that had looked solid weeks earlier were no longer matching reality. Supplier commitments were changing. Forecasts were shifting. Several consultants had offered solutions. None of them agreed with one another. The room felt tense. Not dramatic, just heavy. The kind of pressure that came when too many smart people were running out of answers. One executive adjusted his glasses. We can delay the acquisition. Another immediately disagreed. That will cost us leverage. A third executive shook her head. Moving forward could be worse. The debate continued. Round and round. For the first time in months, Grayson felt genuinely frustrated. Then he remembered a waitress who had spotted a forecasting problem from 20 feet away. The thought appeared unexpectedly. Yet once it arrived, it refused to leave. An hour later, his assistant looked up from her desk in surprise. You want me to call Evelyn Hartwell? Yes. As a consultant? Grayson considered the question. As someone whose opinion I trust. Across Queens, Evelyn was halfway through a lunch shift when her phone vibrated. She nearly ignored it. Then she recognized the number. 10 minutes later, she stood outside Whitmore Plaza again. The same building, the same lobby, the same marble floors. Only this time she was not carrying coffee. She was carrying uncertainty. When she stepped into the conference room, several executives looked openly confused. 1 or 2 recognized her immediately. The expressions on their faces were almost identical to the first day. Grayson noticed. Relax, he said calmly. She is here because I invited her. Evelyn sat quietly near the end of the table. This already feels like a terrible idea. A few people smiled despite the tension. Grayson handed her a summary packet. Take a look. For several minutes, nobody spoke. The room watched as Evelyn studied the reports. She moved slowly, methodically, occasionally making small notes with a pen. Finally, she looked up. Can I ask a question? Of course, Grayson replied. Why is everyone assuming the supplier projections are accurate? The room went silent. An executive frowned. Because they came directly from the supplier. Evelyn nodded. That does not mean they are accurate. Another executive leaned forward. What are you suggesting? She pointed toward a section of the report. Everyone is treating this like a production problem. I think it is a timing problem. Grayson immediately focused. Explain. Evelyn stood and walked toward the screen. The movement surprised even her. 6 months earlier, she had been carrying coffee trays. Now she was explaining market strategy to some of the most experienced executives in New York. Yet somehow it felt natural. She highlighted several numbers, then connected them to seasonal demand forecasts, then shipping schedules, then inventory cycles. One by one, pieces began fitting together. The room grew quieter with every explanation. Not because people disagreed, because they were starting to see what she saw. The problem was not where everyone had been looking. The real issue sat hidden inside a scheduling assumption nobody had questioned. One executive slowly leaned back in his chair. How did we miss that? Nobody answered. Grayson never took his eyes off Evelyn. For nearly 40 minutes, she continued walking the team through her reasoning. By the end, multiple executives were revising recommendations. New strategies emerged. Better options appeared. For the first time all day, the tension eased. As the meeting ended, people gathered their materials in thoughtful silence. Several executives who had doubted her months earlier now thanked her directly. Evelyn looked overwhelmed by the attention. Grayson waited until the room emptied. Then he approached her. You know, he said quietly, most consultants charge a fortune for that level of insight. Evelyn smiled. Good thing I still charge by the cup of coffee. Grayson laughed. Yet beneath the humor, something important had changed. The first time he invited her into that room, it had been curiosity. This time it had been trust. And somehow, both of them knew there was a difference. The impact of Evelyn's analysis spread through Whitmore Dynamics faster than anyone expected. What had started as a single observation uncovered a chain of assumptions that could have cost the company hundreds of millions of dollars over the following years. Entire departments began reviewing forecasts. Teams adjusted timelines. New negotiations were opened. Within 2 weeks, the acquisition that had once looked unstable was moving forward with far stronger terms. For the executives, it was a major business victory. For Grayson, it was something else entirely. It was proof. Proof that the woman carrying coffee trays had never belonged on the sidelines of those conversations. One Friday afternoon, Evelyn was balancing 3 dessert plates when her manager called her into the office. You are not in trouble, he said immediately. That is usually what people say right before I am in trouble. He laughed and handed her an envelope. Inside was an invitation. Whitmore Dynamics Annual Leadership Gala. Evelyn stared at it, then stared at him, then stared at it again. Why would I be invited to this? According to the messenger who delivered it, the invitation came directly from Grayson Whitmore. Evelyn closed her eyes. Of course it did. The following evening, she stood outside one of Manhattan's most prestigious event venues feeling completely out of place. Elegant chandeliers glowed through enormous windows. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Executives, investors, and public figures moved through the lobby with effortless confidence. Evelyn adjusted the sleeve of her navy dress and considered turning around. Then a familiar voice spoke beside her. You look like someone planning an escape. She turned. Grayson stood there in a tailored black suit. Calm as always. I am evaluating options, she admitted. Any promising routes? 3. Stay. His answer was simple, yet somehow it carried more weight than a speech. Together, they entered the ballroom. The evening moved quickly. Conversations, presentations, networking. Everywhere Evelyn went, people seemed to recognize her. Some executives approached to thank her personally. Others introduced her to colleagues. The attention felt overwhelming. Over the previous months, Evelyn had already been serving as an external strategic advisor on several high-priority projects at Whitmore Dynamics. Her recommendations had quietly influenced key decisions across multiple departments. Most people in the ballroom already knew her name long before she arrived that evening. More than once, she considered hiding near the dessert table for the remainder of the evening. At one point, she found herself standing alone near a window overlooking the city. Thousands of lights stretched across Manhattan beneath the night sky. For a moment, everything felt quiet. Then she heard footsteps approaching. Grayson joined her. Neither spoke immediately. Sometimes silence felt easier between them now. "You know what is strange?" Evelyn finally asked. "What?" "A few months ago, I was worried about delivering coffee on time." Grayson smiled. "And now?" She looked around the ballroom. "Now people keep asking my opinion about international market trends. Life is unpredictable. That is one word for it." Grayson studied the city below. "For what it is worth, they are asking because they respect you." Evelyn looked down. The compliment landed differently coming from him. Before she could respond, the master of ceremonies called Grayson's name. The ballroom quieted. Hundreds of guests turned toward the stage. Grayson walked to the podium. He thanked employees, investors, partners. Then he paused. The room waited. "This year," he said, "our company avoided one of the most expensive mistakes in its history." A giant screen illuminated behind him. Numbers appeared. Charts. Growth projections. Evidence of the success everyone was celebrating. Many people contributed to that outcome, Grayson continued. But one person deserves recognition tonight. Evelyn immediately felt nervous. She knew where this was going, and she hated it already. Grayson looked directly toward her. Several months ago, someone walked into the wrong conference room and changed the course of an entire project. Laughter spread through the audience. What impressed me was not intelligence alone. It was integrity. The courage to speak when remaining silent would have been easier. The room applauded. Evelyn felt her face grow warm. Grayson smiled. The best thing that happened to Whitmore Dynamics this year was not a business deal. He paused. It was meeting Evelyn Hartwell. The applause grew louder, much louder, and standing there beneath hundreds of lights, surrounded by people who once would never have noticed her, Evelyn realized something important. For the first time in years, she was no longer being defined by what she had sacrificed. She was finally being recognized for everything she had become. 1 year later, the city looked the same. The traffic still filled Manhattan streets every morning. Yellow taxis still rushed between avenues. Steam still drifted from subway grates during cold winter afternoons. Yet for Evelyn Hartwell, almost everything else had changed. The small apartment in Queens remained. Her favorite neighborhood bookstore remained. Her habit of carrying a novel in her bag remained. But the life she lived now looked very different from the one she had known a year earlier. She was no longer working double shifts at Parkside Cafe. Instead, she spent her days helping analyze strategic projects for Whitmore Dynamics. The transition had not happened overnight. She had resisted at first. Repeatedly. Grayson had expected that. What surprised him was how quickly she earned the respect of everyone around her once she finally agreed to join the company. People stopped seeing a former waitress. They started seeing what had always been there. Intelligence, discipline, perspective, the things that no job title could create. On a bright spring afternoon, Evelyn stepped into Whitmore Plaza carrying a cup of coffee. Old habits were difficult to break. Several employees greeted her by name as she crossed the lobby. She smiled and waved before stepping into an elevator. The ride carried her upward through dozens of floors. As the doors opened, she frowned. The hallway was empty, unusually empty. A message from Grayson had simply said, "Meet me in conference room A at 3 o'clock. No explanation, no details, which usually meant trouble, or something equally suspicious. Evelyn walked toward the familiar room and pushed open the door. Then she stopped. Sunlight poured through the massive windows overlooking Manhattan. The long conference table remained exactly where it had always been. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass. And sitting alone at the head of the table was Grayson Whitmore. He stood as she entered. "You look nervous," she observed. "I am." Evelyn blinked. That answer was unexpected. Grayson was many things. Nervous was rarely one of them. Then she noticed something else. A single cup of coffee sat on the table, positioned in the exact place where she had accidentally entered the room a year earlier. Her smile appeared instantly. "You remembered." "Of course I remembered." Slowly she walked toward the table. The memory returned with perfect clarity. The rain, the wrong door, the awkward silence, the tray of coffee, everything. "I cannot believe. That happened a year ago," she said softly. "Neither can I." Grayson looked around the room. "Funny thing is, I spent years making plans. 5-year plans, 10-year plans, expansion plans, acquisition plans. Evelyn folded her arms. You do enjoy plans. I do. He smiled. And then one day somebody walked into the wrong conference room and ruined all of them. She laughed. That sounds dramatic. It is accurate. For a moment neither spoke. The city shimmered beyond the glass. Afternoon sunlight reflected across distant buildings. Finally Grayson reached into his jacket pocket. His expression softened. The confident billionaire disappeared. What remained was simply a man speaking honestly. For most of my life, I believed success was about finding the right opportunities. Evelyn listened quietly. Then I met you. He took a slow breath. And I realized success is really about finding the right people. Her eyes never left his. Grayson stepped closer. If you had not walked through that door, I would have spent the rest of my life believing I had everything figured out. His voice remained calm, steady, real. But the truth is, the best thing that ever happened to me was something I never planned. Evelyn felt her heart tighten, not from surprise. Somewhere deep down, she had known this moment was coming. Grayson smiled gently. I love your courage. I love your kindness. I love the way you challenge me every single day. Then he opened a small velvet box. And I would like to spend the rest of my life being grateful for one very fortunate mistake. For several seconds, the room was completely silent. The same room where everything had begun. The same room where a waitress had once stood holding a tray of coffee. Except now nothing felt accidental anymore. Tears shimmered in Evelyn's eyes as she laughed softly. You know, she said, for a man worth billions, that was surprisingly good. Relief crossed Grayson's face. Is that a yes? She smiled. The kind of smile that answered before words ever could. Yes. Outside, Manhattan continued moving beneath the afternoon sun. Inside, two people stood together at the place where their lives had first crossed paths. And for the first time, neither of them wondered what would happen next. They already knew. Sometimes the wrong door leads to exactly where you were meant to be. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share this video, and let us know where you are watching from, and subscribe to When He Chose Her channel. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories about courage, kindness, unexpected connections, and life-changing moments. Share this video with someone who believes that the quietest people often have the most extraordinary stories. And do not forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next inspiring journey.